Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a particularly dense collection of sources to work through today, and the through line connecting them all is, well, it's fascinating.
It really is.
We're essentially building what we're calling a future library, a sort of curated stack of insights from books that are just hitting the shelves or are about to, and they really reframe how we see the world.
Mm.
But we're anchoring this huge intellectual sweep with something very specific, very grounded, a deep reexamination of the 1992 disappearance of the Springfield Three.
It's an interesting pairing, isn't it? On one hand, you have this high-level view from the Crown Rights Guide, which is giving us a look at these upcoming literary shifts.
Yeah, everything from revisionist history to, like, the future of AI.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, you have this incredibly granular, haunting investigation into a cold case on Delmar Street, a case that's frustrated the FBI for, what, over 30 years now?
I think the connection, for me anyway, is this concept of the locked room. We're going to look at locked rooms in history, and I mean specifically inside WWII PRW camps here in the U.S.
Right.
We're going to look at locked rooms in our own psychology, and then, of course, the literal locked house in Springfield where three women just vanish.
Yeah.
The mission today is really to pull out those aha moments, the things that challenge the standard narrative. We're not just summarizing these books. We're looking for the structural flaws in the systems we all, tend to trust.
Precisely. And that's the thread that ties it all together, whether it's the legal system when it comes to reparations, or the social systems defining identity in modern China,
Or the forensic systems.
or the forensic systems that just completely failed the Streeter and McCall families. We're looking at what happens when the machinery of society grinds against the individual.
So let's start with the history, because this first book, The 15 by William Giroux, it completely destabilizes the standard American narrative of World War II.
It really does.
We have this idea, that the war was something that happened over there.
Right. Far away.
We sent boys to Europe, we sent boys to the Pacific. But Giroux's central point is that the Third Reich, it was physically present, right here in the American heartland.
It's a massive blind spot in our collective memory.
Yeah.
The sheer number is just staggering. The United States housed nearly 400,000 German prisoners of war.
400,000.
Yeah.
That's the size of a major city.
It is, and these weren't just temporary holding cells near the coasts.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking established camps in places like Oklahoma, Texas,
Kansas, I think I read.
Kansas, exactly. And because of the Geneva Convention, the conditions were, frankly,
Better than what a lot of Americans had at the time, right? With the Depression recovery still sort of lingering.
That's the incredible irony of it. They were well-fed, they worked on local farms to plug the labor shortage, and Giroux even talks about this strange fraternization where German soldiers would, date local American girls.
Wait, hold on. How did that even work? Weren't they behind barbed wire?
Well, a lot of the work was outside the camps on farms. And you had these young men, far from home, and young local women.
Yeah.
Human nature finds a way. But that's the surface story.
Right, because Giroux's book isn't about that weirdly pastoral, almost friendly surface. It's about the war inside the wire.
Yes.
The central thesis here is that the Nazi command structure didn't just dissolve because they surrendered on a battlefield in Europe.
No, in fact, it arguably intensified. It's like they felt this need to prove their loyalty while they were in the belly of the beast, so to speak.
So what did that look like inside the camps?
You had a camp population that was completely divided.
Mm-hmm.
On one side, you had the average Hans, the guy who was drafted, maybe didn't love Hitler and was just happy to be eating 3 square meals a day and not getting shot at.
Okay.
But then you had the true believers, the hardcore SS guys, the Gestapo types.
Yeah.
And they viewed surrender as just a temporary tactical setback. They were still at war.
And they ran the camps internally.
They set up their own kangaroo courts right inside these American camps. If a fellow prisoner was seen being too friendly with an American guard, or if they dared to criticize the Fuhrer, they were labeled a traitor.
And we're not just talking about shunning, are we? The violence was brutal.
Oh, it was brutal. They were beating and, in some cases, murdering fellow prisoners right under the noses of the American guards who, for the most part, were either oblivious or just wanted to keep the peace and didn't look too closely.
Which brings us to the title of the book, The 15. This refers to a specific, incredibly high-stakes legal incident that came out of this internal war.
This is the absolute core of the book. It starts with a murder at a camp in Oklahoma. A group of hardcore Nazis beat a fellow prisoner to death for what they call treason.
And the U.S. government finally had to step in.
They realized they had completely lost control of the internal discipline of the camps. So they decided to make an example.
Yeah.
They identified the ringleaders, 15 of them, and they set up a secret military tribunal.
This wasn't a standard court-martial.
Not at all. This was a tribunal specifically designed to send a message, both to the prisoners and back to Germany. And the verdict was swift. They sentenced all 15 to death by hanging.
And this is where the geopolitics gets absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, because the Third Reich, even as it was crumbling in late 44, early 45, still had an intelligence network. They found out about the death sentences.
And their response.
Their response was this chilling act of diplomatic leverage. They went into their own POW camps, and they selected 15 American prisoners, high-value targets like pilots, intelligence officers, and they condemned them to death in direct retaliation.
It was a literal hostage trade.
A hostage trade proposed in blood. The message was simple. You kill our 15, we kill your 15. The book details these frantic diplomatic cables flying back and forth between Washington and Berlin, mostly through Swiss intermediaries.
You can just imagine the tension in the State Department, having to weigh the concept of justice, executing convicted murderers, against the very pragmatic reality of saving American lives.
And Giroux really brings this to life by focusing on the individuals. There's this German ringleader nicknamed King Kong who just represents this terrifying, unbreakable ideological conviction. He felt he did nothing wrong.
But on the American side?
It's the psychological torture of being a pawn. You're an American pilot sitting in a cell in Germany. The war is technically winding down. You think you might make it home. And suddenly you're told you're going to be executed. Not because of anything you did, but because of a court case in Oklahoma that you've never even heard of.
It just underscores that the battlefield it's global. And the trauma of war isn't just about combat. It's that realization that your life is just a bargaining chip for the state.
Absolutely. And Giroux argues this incident, which was kept highly classified for a very long time, really shaped the post-war treatment of prisoners. It forced the U.S. to grapple with the limits of its own judicial power during wartime.
It's a story about the state calculating the value of a life. And that is, I think, the perfect bridge to our next source, which deals with how the U.S. government calculates value in a civil context. We're looking at Getting to Reparations by Dorothy A. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's important here is that Brown is a tax law expert, so she's not approaching this from a purely sociological perspective. She's coming at it like a forensic accountant.
And that's exactly what makes this book so powerful and so difficult for critics to dismiss. The standard arguments against reparations usually fall into two buckets, right?
Right. It was too long ago, or it's just administratively impossible to figure out who gets what.
And Brown just dismantles both of those arguments by looking at the receipts. She pulls up the government's own records. Her argument basically shifts the debate from should we do this to why haven't we done this, given all the precedents?
She lists these specific historical instances where the federal government had absolutely no problem cutting checks for what it deemed loss and violence. And the most jarring example for me was the compensation of slaveholders.
It's a historical fact that is so often glossed over or just not taught. When the District of Columbia ended slavery, and this is before the Emancipation Proclamation applied nationwide, the federal government paid reparations.
Did they pay the owners?
They paid the owners for their loss of property. She highlights this one case of a wealthy white woman, Margaret Barber. She received $9,000 for her loss of slaves.
And in today's money, what is that?
It's roughly $250,000. So the government said, we are taking your property. Here is fair market value for it.
So the legal precedent is established right there. The government pays for the loss of assets. The perversity, of course, is that the assets were human beings.
But Brown's point is purely legal and financial. The mechanism for payment exists. She doesn't stop there either. She brings up the 1892 lynching of Italian immigrants in New Orleans.
I had never heard of this.
It's a crucial data point in her argument. A mob lynched 11 Italian men. It was a horrific, internationally condemned event. The Italian government was, understandably, furious.
So President
Benjamin Harrison, wanting to avoid a major diplomatic rupture with Italy, authorized a payment of $25,000 to the families of the victims. In today's money, that's about $766,000.
And what was the legal justification for that?
It was an explicit payment for violence failed to be prevented by the state. The government acknowledged its failure to protect people within its borders and paid for that failure.
And then, of course, the big one is the Indian Claims Commission.
Right. The government, over decades, paid out $818 million, which is hundreds of billions in today's value, to indigenous tribes for stolen land.
Now, you have to be careful with that example.
You do. We have to be clear. This didn't give the land back, and many activists argue it was just blood money that didn't come close to the true value of what was taken. But from a purely legal standpoint,
It's an admission of liability.
it's the government saying, we took this, it was wrong, we owe you X amount for it. So Brown's conclusion is that this whole administrative impossibility argument is frankly a lie.
We have a tax code that can handle incredibly complex depreciation of assets. We have a history of paying for lynchings, as long as the victims are foreign nationals. We have a history of paying for lost property, as long as the claimants are white.
So the exclusion of Black Americans from this framework isn't an accident. It's not a logistical hurdle. It's a specific, repeated policy choice. She argues that the refusal to pay reparations isn't about logistics at all. It's about who the law recognizes as a victim worthy of compensation.
And she even proposes how it could be done.
Yeah, through the existing tax infrastructure. Things like tax credits, wealth transfers, stuff the IRS does every single day. It's about a system of justice that has been, up to this point, selectively applied.
Speaking of selectively applied systems and state control, let's pivot from the U.S. to China. We're looking at Let Only Red Flowers Bloom by Emily Feng. We're moving from the American state's financial control to the Chinese state's control over identity itself.
Feng was a correspondent in Beijing during this period, and she documents this major shift in propaganda, especially around the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. The state began to aggressively and very publicly define the ideal citizen.
And that definition was extremely narrow.
Incredibly narrow. Han ethnicity, Mandarin-speaking, officially atheist, and of course, politically loyal to the party. The problem, which the party sees as a feature, not a bug, is that China is an empire of immense diversity.
So you have millions upon millions of people, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and others who suddenly find their very existence, their culture, their language, defined by the state as incorrect.
And Feng tells these deeply personal stories of the human cost. There's one about a Mongolian teacher who has to flee the country, and his crime wasn't terrorism or violence, it was wanting to teach his students in his mother tongue, Mongolian.
That's what she calls the soft violence of cultural erasure.
Exactly. We know about the hard violence. She covers the re-education camps in Xinjiang extensively, and it's harrowing. But the story of the teacher is so poignant because it shows the immense psychological toll. This man has to leave his home, his elderly parents, everything he has ever known, just to preserve the language that defines how he thinks and dreams.
And she connects all of this to the surveillance state. It's not just about passing laws from on high.
No, it's about the cameras on every street corner. The social credit scores that can determine if you can buy a train ticket. The pressure on neighbors to report on neighbors who aren't conforming. It is a totalizing system that aims to control every aspect of life.
Which brings us to the most intimate form of resistance imaginable. Food. We have another book here, The Last Sweet Bite by Michael Sheikh, and this pairs so perfectly with Feng's book.
It really does. Sheikh looks at how authoritarian regimes and colonial powers often target culinary heritage as a specific strategy to break a people's spirit.
It sounds kind of abstract, but he gives these really concrete examples. In the Uyghur region, he talks about the sinicization of bakeries.
Which is just, it's so insidious. It's not enough to control the people, you have to control their bread.
Because bread is visceral.
It's visceral. The smell of traditional non-baking in a tandoor, a clay oven, it triggers memory, family identity. So by forcing bakeries to standardize, to use industrial ovens to make Chinese-style bread, the state is actively trying to sever that sensory link to the past.
He also looks at Bolivia and U.S. war on drugs.
Yeah, this is a great example of conflicting worldviews. To the U.S. DEA, a field of coca plants is a potential cocaine factory. Full stop. But to an indigenous grandmother in the Andes, the coca leaf is medicine, it's tea for altitude sickness, it's a sacred part of rituals that go back centuries.
So when those fields are razed...
It's felt as a cultural amputation. You're not just destroying a crop, you're destroying a way of life.
But the sweet bite in the title, that refers to the reclamation, right? The idea that cooking itself can be an act of defiance.
Yes, that's the hopeful part of the book. He spends time with Rohingya refugees in the camps in Bangladesh. These are people who have lost their citizenship, their homes, their land, everything. But in the camps, they will go to extraordinary lengths to find the specific spices, the right kind of fish paste, to make their traditional curries.
That act of cooking isn't just about staving off hunger.
Not at all. It's a political statement. It's saying, You can displace us, you can try to erase us, but you cannot make us forget who we are. You cannot take the taste of home from our mouths. This is very powerful, very quiet form of soft power, right from the bottom up.
Let's follow that thread of reclaiming the self into our next section. We have a stack of memoirs here that are all, in their own way, about individuals trying to find their footing in systems that really weren't built for them. And we're starting with a really radical pivot, A Change of Habit by Sister Monica Clare.
I love this story because it just completely disrupts our stereotype of what a nun is. Monica wasn't some sheltered girl who went straight from Catholic school to the convent.
Not at all. She was a high-powered photo editor in the New York media world.
Dealing with cocaine-fueled photographers, the insane vanity of the fashion industry, the constant noise of making it, and she just walked away from all of it to take a vow of poverty and join an Episcopal convent.
The detail that really stuck with me was what she calls the economy of grace inside the convent, specifically the rule against compliments.
Right. To a modern ear, that sounds so harsh, like, hey, nice soup, sister.
Yeah.
And the response is just silence.
It seems cold.
It does, but the philosophy behind it is profound.
Mm-hmm.
In her old life, her media life, everything was transactional. You do a good job so you can get a raise or a pat on the back or a like on social media. It's all about getting something in return.
Validation.
Constant validation. The convent taught her that acts of generosity should be completely free from the expectation of return. You do a good thing because it's a good thing to do, not because you want to be thanked for it. She talks about the literal withdrawal symptoms she had from that lack of praise. She realized she was addicted to it.
It's like a detox program for the ego. And speaking of the ego and the literal heights of achievement, let's look at Enough by Melissa Arnott Reed. She was the first American woman to summit Mount Everest without using supplemental oxygen. Physiologically, that is on the very edge of what is humanly possible.
It's an incredible feat of endurance. But the book isn't really about the climb up. It's about the crash after she got to the summit.
This is the arrival fallacy.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
The belief that once I achieve X, I will finally feel whole. Reed conquered the deadliest mountain on Earth. She was quite literally on top of the world. But she writes with this brutal honesty about standing there on the summit and realizing she was still the exact same person. She still had all the same insecurities and that same gnawing feeling of not being enough.
It's the silence of the descent that gets you. The adrenaline fades, the sponsorship deals get signed, the articles are written, but that internal void is still there. It's such a powerful cautionary tale about using external achievement to try and fix internal brokenness.
Which is a perfect segue into Alligator Tears by Edgar Gomez. This is another memoir about survival, but the central metaphor he uses is just brilliant. The zigzag.
I grew up in the South, so I know this myth. The idea that if an alligator is chasing you, you don't run in a straight line.
You run in a zigzag pattern because the gator has a wide turning radius and can't keep up.
Right.
Now, biologically, it's a total myth. Gators or ambush predators, they don't really chase you across a field like that. But as a metaphor for surviving poverty and marginalization, it is perfect.
He grew up poor and queer in Florida.
And he argues that the American dream, this idea of working hard and moving in a straight line up the ladder of success, is a lie told to the poor to keep them running. He says if you're marginalized, you can't run straight, the system will get you. You have to zigzag, you have to hustle, code switch, hide parts of yourself, and constantly dodge the jaws of the system that are trying to snap you up.
The one scene that just captures this perfectly for me is his job at the sandal shop in a tourist trap. He's on his knees all day, putting sandals on the sweaty, smelly feet of tourists for minimum wage. It's just so degrading.
Physically and emotionally exhausting work. And then the zigzag happens at night. He clocks out of that job and rushes to the Pulse nightclub. And in that space, the posture completely changes. He isn't the servant on his knees anymore. He's the star. He's celebrated. He's part of a vibrant community. The book is this beautiful, heartbreaking tribute to those sacred spaces like Pulse, where people who have to zigzag all day can finally, for a few hours, walk straight.
But sometimes the space that looks glamorous and freeing from the outside is actually the most toxic. Which brings us to You Want to Be on Top by Sarah Hartshorn. This takes us inside the America's Next Top model house.
Oh, man. We all watched that show. It was a cultural juggernaut in the early 2000s.
Absolutely.
But Hartshorn, who was a contestant on the show, reveals that it was essentially a Stanford prison experiment, but with fashion and really bad makeovers.
The luxury mansion was a total set.
A set. She says they didn't have a dishwasher or a microwave. The girls were fainting from hunger and sheer exhaustion during the elimination ceremonies. which she says would drag on for 8, 9, 10 hours for just a few minutes of television.
And the surveillance was total. She talks about having to hold conversations in closets.
The closet confessions. Because the producers had cameras and mics absolutely everywhere. The only place the production crew couldn't physically squeeze a camera operator was inside the small closets in the bedrooms. So if the girls wanted to have a genuine human conversation, one that wouldn't be edited into a villain arc or a sob story, they would huddle in the closet among the clothes and whisper.
It just emphasizes how reality TV strip mines human emotion for content. There's no reality to it.
None. And Hartshorn was the designated plus-size model of her season, which, looking back now, is just laughable.
Because she was what, a size 10? Maybe a 12?
Something like that. And it really just shows how incredibly toxic the early 2000s were regarding body image. The things that judges like Tyra Banks said to her, the way her body was framed as this obstacle she had to overcome. Reading it today, it just feels abusive. It's a stark reminder of how much unlearning we've had to do as a culture.
And that unlearning has to extend to issues of race and desire, which is the subject of our final memoir, Fetishized by Kylie Yu. She deals with the specific trauma of yellow fever.
You write from the perspective of someone who is in the pinup and modeling industry, and she was caught in this impossible double bind.
How so?
On one hand, she was trying desperately to conform to Western beauty standards, the blonde hair, the body type, just to get work. But on the other hand, the work she did get was entirely predicated on her being the exotic Asian trope, the submissive, hypersexualized fantasy.
And she traces this back to the media we all consumed.
Oh, absolutely. From Memoirs of a Geisha in Miss Saigon all the way to specifically that infamous Me Love You Long Time line from Full Metal Jacket.
A line that became a weapon.
A verbal weapon. It was used to reduce an entire, incredibly diverse demographic of women down to a single, subservient sexual object. Yu's journey in the book is about trying to reclaim her own sexuality for herself, rather than performing a version of it for a white male gaze. It's a painful read, but it's so necessary. It shows how preference can often just be a mask for encoded racism and really skewed power dynamics.
Okay, let's shift gears. We're moving into part 3, business, tech, and the future. We're going from the personal zigzag to the systemic ones that leaders and all of us face. And we have to start with the biggest locked room mystery in the entire financial world, The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto by Benjamin Wallace.
This is the definitive story so far of the hunt for the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto. It is one of the few true, enduring mysteries of the internet age.
It's incredible. Someone or some group wrote the code, released the white paper in 2008, communicated with other developers for a few years, and then, poof, vanish.
But unlike the Springfield 3, they left something very significant behind.
The Genesis block.
Exactly. There is a Bitcoin wallet, or a series of wallets, associated with Satoshi that holds roughly 1 million Bitcoins.
And depending on the market on any given day, that's an 11-figure fortune. We're talking tens of billions of dollars.
An untouchable fortune. Because it hasn't moved. In all these years, not a single Satoshi has been spent or transferred. This is the detail that drives the crypto sleuths absolutely crazy. If Satoshi is alive, they are the most disciplined human being on planet Earth.
So Wallace runs through all the major suspects. To me, Hal Finney seems the most likely candidate.
He's a strong contender, a brilliant cryptographer, an early collaborator. He lived just down the street from a man literally named Dorian Nakamoto, which suggests a possible origin for the pen name.
And he passed away from ALS.
Which would neatly explain why the coins have never moved. His family swears it wasn't him, but the circumstantial evidence is compelling.
But then you have these other figures like Craig Wright.
Oh, Craig Wright. The mercurial Australian who aggressively, and in court, claims to be Satoshi, but has repeatedly failed to provide the definitive cryptographic proof moving one of the original coins. Wallace paints this whole world as this bizarre mix of high-minded libertarian philosophy and, frankly, low-rent grifting. It's a fascinating study of how a myth is created and sustained in real time.
Managing that kind of complexity, whether it's the crypto market or global supply chains, is the focus of our next book, The Systems Leader by Robert Siegel. This one is a bit more academic, but the core concept of cross pressures is vital for anyone in a leadership role today.
Siegel's argument is that the old business school model of do one thing and do it well is completely obsolete. Leaders today are caught in a vice of opposing forces.
Can you give an example?
Sure, you have to be hyper-local to please the community and deal with local regulations, but you also have to be hyper-global to manage your supply chain and talent pool. You have to execute flawlessly and maximize profit for the next quarter to keep shareholders happy.
But you also have to invest heavily in R&D that might not pay off for 10 years or you'll be disrupted.
Exactly. These are opposing, contradictory pressures happening simultaneously. And most people crack under that strain. They pick a side. They say, we are an innovation company, and they neglect current operations and the business fails. Or they say, we are an operations company. They focus only on efficiency, and they get blindsided by the next big thing.
So Siegel's solution isn't to pick one?
No. His point is that you have to build a system and a leadership team that can hold attention. You don't solve the paradox of local versus global. You manage it. It's about developing cognitive flexibility and being comfortable with ambiguity.
Which brings us to the cognitive load we all carry, not just leaders. Time Anxiety by Chris Guillebeau.
Yep.
I have to admit, this book hit me hard. I am a person who lives by my to-do list. I get anxious when there are unchecked boxes at the end of the day.
I think we all do. It's the modern condition. Guillebeau's diagnosis is that our anxiety doesn't come from a literal lack of hours in the day. It comes from a misalignment and from the false belief that if we just work harder, faster, or smarter, we will eventually finish.
But you can't finish.
You can never finish. The incoming stream of tasks, emails, and demands is infinite. The inbox never gets to zero for long.
So his solution is what he calls building a tolerance for incomplete to-do lists.
It's a form of radical acceptance.
Wow.
You have to be able to look at a list of 10 important things, choose to do the 3 most critical, and then go to sleep without hating yourself for not doing the other 7.
He has a line in there that is just, it's brutal but true. You must be willing to disappoint people to save your own life.
It's so good. Because if you try to reply to every email, if you say yes to every request, you are fundamentally prioritizing other people's agendas over your own health and your own most important work.
I am putting that on a sticky note on my monitor. Disappoint people to save your own life.
It's a game changer. Finally, in this business stack, we're pairing 2 books that tackle the intersection of race and capital. Play the Game, Change the Game, Leave the Game by Robert W. Livingston, and You Deserve to Be Rich by Rashad Bilal and Troy Millings.
Livingston's framework is super clear and helpful for understanding how to navigate corporate America, especially for Black professionals. He says you essentially face 3 strategic choices.
Right. First is play the game. This is the Ruth Simmons approach. She became the first Black president of an Ivy League university, Brown, by mastering the existing rules of academia and outperforming everyone.
Okay, that's one path.
The second is change the game. This is the activist approach. The prime example is Colin Kaepernick, who used his platform as an NFL quarterback to force a national conversation about police brutality, even though he knew it would cost him his career. He tried to change the rules from within.
And the third path?
Leave the game. This is about opting out of predominantly white institutions entirely to build Black-owned businesses and generate Black-owned equity.
Which is exactly what Bilal and Millings preach in You Deserve to Be Rich. These are the guys from the Earn Your Leisure podcast.
Their entire philosophy is leave the game by buying the board. They focus heavily on financial literacy as a form of civil rights in the 21st century. They argue that you can't protest your way to freedom if you don't understand how capital gains tax works or how to leverage whole life insurance policies as a financial tool.
It's about healing financial trauma.
It is. It's about removing the mystery and the fear around money so that it can be used as a strategic tool for liberation rather than a shackle that keeps you in a game you can't win.
Okay, so we have examined the systems of war, the systems of identity, and the systems of commerce. Now, we are going to walk into a single house on a quiet street where all of those systems completely and utterly failed.
Part 4. The Deep Dive. The Vanishing on Delmar Street.
We are drawing our information primarily from the new investigation, detailed in the book Pitch for White Pines and Stone, by the actor Dylan McDermott and former FBI agent Christopher Whitcomb, as well as the FBI's VICAP alerts and other public records. This is the story of the disappearance of the Springfield Three.
To really understand this case, you have to feel the atmosphere of that night. It's June 7, 1992, Springfield, Missouri. It's the Ozarks, so it's hot, it's humid, it's sticky. The crickets are deafeningly loud. And it's graduation night for Kickapoo High School.
You can just feel that energy, that transition from high school to real life. The parties, the excitement, that feeling of total invincibility.
And at the center of it, we have Susie Streeter, who's 19, and her best friend Stacy McCall, who's 18. They are the golden girls of the night. They're beautiful, popular, and just so excited about the future. And the third woman is Cheryl Levitt, Susie's mom. She's 47, a popular hairdresser, described as tough but deeply loving.
The timeline of that night is absolutely crucial here. Susie and Stacy are bouncing between a few different graduation parties. They're driving their own cars initially, but then they consolidate into one to make things easier.
Right. And the original plan was for both of them to stay the night at their friend Janelle's house. But when they finally get to Janelle's around 2 in the morning, the place is a zoo.
Yeah.
It's totally packed. People are sleeping on the floor. It's loud. It's chaotic.
And Susie has a much better option. She just got a brand new king-size waterbed as a graduation gift.
The ultimate 90s luxury item. It's the perfect crash pad. So she tells Stacy, hey, let's just go to my mom's house. We've got the big bed. It'll be quiet. We can sleep in late before we go to the water park tomorrow.
So they leave Janelle's. They drive to Cheryl's house at 1717 East Delmar Street.
They probably arrive around 2:01 a.m. We know this because they parked their cars, both of them, in the circular driveway. The cars were still there, untouched, the next morning.
And that is the last positive sighting of any of them. That is the moment they effectively vanish from the world.
It is.
So let's walk through the discovery the next day, the morning after. Their friend Janelle, expecting to meet them at the water park, starts calling the house around 8 a.m. No answer. She calls again. Still no answer.
So she and her boyfriend decide to just drive over, maybe around 9 a.m. They pull into the driveway. They see both cars are there. So they figure the girls just overslept. They walk up to the front door.
And it's unlocked.
It's unlocked.
Yes.
Janelle walks in. The house is silent. But there are these immediate visual cues that something is wrong, even if she doesn't process it as a crime yet. First, the dog.
Cinnamon, little Yorkshire Terrier.
The dog is agitated, yapping, freaking out, which is apparently out of character.
And then the purses.
This is the detail. This is the detail that has haunted every single person who has ever studied this case. At the foot of the stairs, lined up in a neat, orderly row, are the three women's purses: Cheryl's, Susie's, and Stacy's.
Let's just analyze that for a second. A woman's purse is her lifeline. It has her keys, her money, her driver's license, her cigarettes, her makeup. You do not leave the house without it, ever.
Especially not Cheryl Levitt, who was a known chain smoker. Her cigarettes and her lighter were found on her nightstand upstairs in her bedroom. She would never, ever have walked out the door willingly without them. The fact that the purses were all there and lined up so neatly suggests one of two things.
Either they arrived, put them down, and were immediately interrupted by someone they knew.
Or they were forced to leave them there by an abductor. It's not the sign of a panicked, voluntary exit.
So Janelle keeps walking through the house. She goes to the kitchen. What does she see?
She sees a pot of coffee on the machine. The pot is full, but one cup has been poured and is sitting on the counter.
And the coffee is cold.
The coffee is cold. This suggests a timeline. It suggests Cheryl probably woke up first, maybe around 7:00 or 8:00 a.m., went to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, poured herself a cup, and then the interruption happened. Whatever happened, happened then.
But there's another critical detail in the bedrooms. The beds look like they'd been slept in. The covers on the waterbed were pulled back.
And here's the folded shorts detail, which is so mundane it's terrifying. In Susie's room, police later found her clothes from graduation night. But they also found a pair of flowered shorts folded neatly. And inside the pocket of the shorts was her jewelry, her watch, her necklace.
That implies a routine, a calm, end-of-the-night routine. She came home, she took off her jewelry, she put it in her pocket so she wouldn't lose it, she folded the shorts, she went to bed. This wasn't a frenzy. This was a completely normal night.
So the evidence points to this. They came home, they got ready for bed, they slept. The abduction likely happened in the morning after Cheryl made coffee.
But how? How do you abduct 3 adult women from a house in broad daylight in a dense suburban neighborhood without a single scream, without a gunshot, without any sign of a struggle?
The house was undisturbed. No broken glass, except for one thing. No overturned furniture. The only sign of any disorder was the glass globe cover on the front porch light. It was shattered on the porch. But the light bulb inside was still working.
Okay, now we have to talk about the tragedy of the investigation itself. The good intentions that completely destroyed the crime scene.
Janelle didn't know it was a crime scene. She and her boyfriend thought the girls had just been spontaneously picked up by friends to go to a lake or something. So, trying to be helpful, she cleaned up.
What did she do?
She swept up the broken glass from the porch light and threw it away. She washed a few dishes that were in the sink. Then more friends and family started showing up as the day went on. They used the toilet. They answered the ringing phone. By the time someone finally called the police late that afternoon, realizing this was serious, the house had been contaminated by at least a dozen well-meaning people.
So any fingerprints, any DNA from a potential perpetrator.
Was likely wiped away or hopelessly overlaid with all the new prints. It was a forensic nightmare.
And then there's the answering machine. This is the detail that feels like it's straight out of a horror movie.
The phone had an answering machine with a cassette tape. The little red light was blinking, indicating there was a message. A friend trying to be helpful pressed play.
And they heard a male voice.
A male voice. The descriptions of it vary. Some say the message was lewd and sexual. Some say it was just strange and unsettling. But here's the catastrophic part. The friend, thinking the tape might be full and that the women might try to call home, decided to clear space. And they accidentally deleted the message.
That one button press erased the only potential piece of audio evidence of the killer. It's just a devastating, irreversible mistake.
The FBI later brought in audio engineers, some reports say from NASA, to try and recover the audio from the magnetic impression on the tape. But it was gone. Just digital silence.
So with no physical evidence, no bodies, and no witnesses who could have done this, the investigation looked at everyone. Ex-boyfriends, local criminals, transient workers. But one name just keeps surfacing year after year: Robert Craig Cox.
Cox is a terrifying figure. He was an Army Ranger, which means he was trained in silent movement, surveillance, and killing. And in 1978, he was convicted of murdering a 19-year-old woman in Florida named Sharon Zellers.
And the details of that Florida murder are absolutely gruesome and very specific.
When Cox was arrested for that crime, he had a significant undeniable injury. An inch of his tongue was missing.
He claimed he bit it off himself.
He had some story about biting it off himself in a fit of rage or something. But the prosecution argued, very convincingly, that the victim, Sharon Zellers, bit it off while fighting for her life. The forensics supported that theory. He was found guilty and sentenced to death.
But he got out.
He got out. On a procedural error, the Florida Supreme Court overturned his conviction on a technicality regarding how evidence was handled. He was released. And in June of 1992, where was he living? Springfield, Missouri.
And what was he doing for work?
This is the key. He was working in underground utilities. He laid cable. He worked on water mains. He knew the subterranean layout of the city intimately. He knew which backyards connected to which drainage ditches. And he admitted to the police that he'd worked on Delmar Street.
So you have a trained killer, a known sexual predator who knows the terrain inside and out, living nearby at the time of this disappearance. Did he have an alibi for that morning?
He did. His girlfriend at the time told police he was at church with her that morning. And the police apparently verified it. But alibis can be faked, times can be fudged. Years later, Cox was imprisoned in Texas for a different kidnapping. And from prison, he started taunting journalists and investigators about the Springfield case.
What did he say?
He said things like, "I know the women are dead. I know where the bodies are." He played these cruel games, saying, "I'll tell you what happened, but only after my mother dies."
And his mother eventually died. Did he talk?
No, he went silent again. He refuses to give the families any closure. It's the ultimate power play for a psychopath.
The new book, White Pines and Stone, re-examines the Cox theory, but it also looks closely at the possibility of a ruse.
And this would explain the purses. This theory suggests that someone knocked on the door that morning, maybe dressed as a police officer or a utility worker claiming there was a gas leak. Someone in a position of authority.
And Cheryl would have opened the door.
She would have. And if this person said, "Ma'am, you need to evacuate the house immediately. Come with me now," what would you do? You wouldn't stop to grab your purse if you thought you were just stepping out to the curb for a few minutes while they checked a gas line.
And once they're out the door,
a van pulls up, a weapon is shown, and it's over. It explains the lack of struggle inside the house. It explains the compliance. It is, to me, the most terrifying theory because it weaponizes our trust in the systems that are supposed to protect us.
the Springfield Three remains one of the most baffling and heartbreaking cases in American history because these three women simply ceased to exist. No bodies have ever been found. No definitive physical evidence has ever been located. There's just the void they left behind and that house on Delmar Street.
It's a profound reminder that our sense of safety is an incredibly fragile construct. We lock our doors, we live in nice neighborhoods, but there are predators out there who know how to bypass those systems.
We really want to encourage you to read more about this. White Pines and Stone, when it comes out, will go into the ground-penetrating radar searches that have been done on parking garages, where some people believe the bodies may have been buried in the fresh concrete. It is a deep, dark rabbit hole.
And to pull us out of that darkness just for a moment, let's wrap up with our literary miscellany. We always like to end with a few other intriguing titles that expand the horizon in completely different directions.
First up, if you need a serious palate cleanser, we have The Spamalot Diaries by the great Eric Idle.
It's hilarious. It's a chaotic, anxiety-ridden, and brilliant diary of trying to turn Monty Python and the Holy Grail into a smash hit Broadway musical.
It's also a great lesson in resilience, isn't it? Creating art is just messy. Idle breaks his ankle, he fights with producers, he's dealing with massive egos. It completely demystifies the glamour of Broadway.
Then, for the adventure lovers, we have Neptune's Ransom by Julian Sainton.
This is the story of the San Jose.
The San Jose, a Spanish galleon that sank off the coast of Colombia in 1708, with what might be the single richest treasure in human history. Billions and billions in gold, silver, and emeralds.
But the book isn't just a treasure hunt.
No, it's about the legal and political battle over the wreck today. It's the government of Colombia versus Spain, versus indigenous groups whose ancestors mined the gold, versus an American salvage company that claims they found it first. It shows that even 300 years later, at the bottom of the ocean, history is still a battleground.
Okay, next we have Should We Go Extinct by Todd May. A light title for a light read.
A philosophical heavy hitter for sure. May asks a really uncomfortable moral question. Given all the suffering humanity causes to animals, to the planet, to each other, would the universe be an ethically better place if we just quietly stopped reproducing and faded away? He doesn't advocate for violence, just a voluntary end. It is a truly challenging thought experiment about our ultimate value as a species.
And finally, a novel to round things out, The Correspondent by Virginia Evans.
This is a beautiful story about a 73-year-old woman who has spent her life as a recluse, but decides to start writing letters to all the important people in her past to confront things left unsaid. It's a very moving look at memory, regret, and the courage it takes to confront your own history before it's too late.
Joe. We have traveled a very long way today, from the secret tribunals of World War II to the modern tax codes of reparations, from the summit of Everest to the Vanishing Act in Springfield. What's the synthesis here? What's the thread?
I think the synthesis is about the edge. We mentioned that book briefly, Letters from the Edge, and I think that's where we've been hovering this whole time. We've looked at the edge of the law with those German POWs, the edge of social acceptance with the zigzag survivors, and the literal edge of human knowledge in the Springfield 3 case.
And it's human curiosity that drives us to that edge. We want to know what's in the dark. We want to know where the money is, where the bodies are, where the justice is.
Exactly. And sometimes looking over that edge is terrifying. The things we find there can be horrifying. But the alternative is ignorance. And as we saw with the Nazi power structures in those camps, and as the McCall and Streeter families learned in the most painful way possible, ignorance doesn't keep you safe. Understanding the systems, how they work, how they fail, and how they can be manipulated is the only way we can hope to navigate them.
And that is the mission of the deep dive. Thank you for going on this journey with us today. Please check the show notes for links to all these incredible books and sources. Stay curious.
And keep questioning the locked rooms. Goodbye.